2021 was a difficult year for Battlefield 2042. The game released, it wasn't received particularly well, and there seemed to be a lot of underlying flaws with the title that ultimately seemed to have led to or were part of a huge leadership change behind the Battlefield franchise. And now Battlefield 2042 is out in the wild, 2022 has to be a good year for it. It simply just has to be the case for this title that it has to turn things around and ultimately commit to a lot of fan service in order to bring people back to the game. It's going to require a lot of grueling work, the kind of grueling work that Rainbow Six Siege, games like No Man's Sky and other titles that were effectively labors of love received in their time. So I thought I'd kick off the year with ways that they can improve Battlefield 2042 fairly simplistically. Stuff that would just make a massive difference to the game and improve the overall setup of things. Now some of these changes are big, some of them are small, and I'm going to start with the small ones first because I feel that these can make an effective change very early on. And the first one for me is redesigning some of the map flow. Battlefields of the past have always had a flow to them, and in 2042 that's only really kind of the case on the exact objectives themselves. In and around the objectives, the game feels very choppy, and a lot of the fighting does happen when you're going from A to B, so the idea that these areas should just be open, barren and neglected simply isn't good enough. The objectives themselves can sometimes be really great. The giant ship on Discarded, for example, is a hell of a lot of fun, and I think Manifest is probably the best example of a map that generally flows quite well. Although it definitely has some open barren spaces that could do with a bit more cover, the general flow of Manifest allows you to move around the map in a fairly easy way, and a kind of way that feels good. You know, you can jump off from the peak in the middle of the map, rotate around to different objectives, get from A to B fairly quickly. But generally just seeing more cover, more lanes, and just more of a conventional map styling around some of these more open areas would hugely benefit the game. There are just some spaces of the game right now where it's nothing or just a barren space of land, and some places where there are lots of assets that are being utilized further on the outskirts of maps that aren't really being used. And I'd like to see some of those resources rotated around the map, and increasing the flow and general feel as you move from objective to objective. Now, moving static elements is something that they've already done relatively quickly in the Battlefield 2042 Rush, so I think it's possible they could move some static elements around in order to make these maps a little bit more tolerable, or at the bare minimum just give them a little bit more dip or verticality. Thinking of Discarded, moving up to the boat is very barren, and even just some, cracks in the land or some trench lines or something would make a huge difference. This would have to work in conjunction with more transport vehicles, and not every transport vehicle needs an offensive weapon. The good old-fashioned days of just having a Black Hawk or a boat or a simple 4x4 that didn't have any armaments on it need to come back into this title. Now, being that a wingsuit is not a viable option for every single player in the game, the fact that traversing the map can feel very long and sluggish just isn't really good enough for me, and I think they really do need to greatly improve the traversal between objectives, and providing more non-offensive transport-based vehicles is another good change and a quick change that would make a great difference. The next larger change is a redesign of the specialist system. The specialists just don't fit into this game. You have this weird Battlefield 2042 that was promoted to us, and a Battlefield 2042 that we received. The trailers seem to point towards this gritty, futuristic BF4, where it's still the same kind of team play based chaos, but further in the future, and in a future that is more chaotic and turbulent. But it's just not good enough here, and I think that these specialists massively detract from the feeling in 2042, the feeling that you get going around the maps, the feeling of looking at individual soldiers. Some of them look soldier-like, but some of them just look like characters, and nobody wants that in a Battlefield game. Nobody cares about that in a Battlefield game, and realistically, you could decouple some of the abilities from these specialists and provide more generic soldiers. At the bare minimum, they need to try their best in order to reshape the specialist system in such a way that specialists actively contribute towards their teammates. Another large-scale change that will take some time is a full redesign of Hazard Zone. This mode had so much potential, and potential to be a sort of lighter or less hardcore version of Escape from Tarkov, and it never achieved that. It was too indescribable. It didn't make sense in a lot of places. The objectives, how they worked, how the gameplay worked, how the currency system worked, and the objective system None of it ever really made a lot of sense, and I think this mode was literally just a, well, we need another mode, let's just throw this in there. And it had so much potential, and conceptually has a lot of potential, that has been wasted quite massively in 2042, and it's something that I think needs a big change moving into this year. The next change that is absolutely vital is them finalizing what in the world is going on with inputs in Battlefield 2042, and why playing on consoles feels so much better than playing on PC. Everything kind of feels delayed, everything feels as though it has input latency, everything doesn't feel picture perfect accurate, and I seem to believe that there is some kind of emulation happening between input devices, or sometimes a mouse is being mistaken for an analog stick. I don't really know what the case is, but it's just not working in a way that I think is a good way for the game. Hell, even on controller and console, the way aim assist works and the way the game functions in terms of how controls feel incredibly clunky. Battlefield really should be offering the same level of customization options and support for producing different feels for your control types on console, akin to what Call of Duty Warzone is doing as well. And this definitely links in with the feel of the game, input devices, you know, all this kind of thing that is going on within the game. But networking is a huge part of this, and just the game feeling as though it's snappy and responsive. And sometimes it does work and sometimes it doesn't. Sometimes you get consistency and sometimes you don't. It can get very confusing in some places, and I've noticed the largest consistency in terms of gameplay coming from Battlefield Portal servers as opposed to main 2042 servers. Now, my last major change is balancing. This is something that was addressed pretty much early on, quite aggressively in 2042, but it still isn't perfect. There are a lot of balancing changes that need to be made to this game, rather than just aggressive nerfs or aggressive buffs that have to be updated to try and fix things or make things work. You know, there shouldn't be a case where helicopters are completely nerfed to oblivion, or jets and tanks are completely weak and useless, and there needs to be that middle ground. And Battlefield already has Battlefield 4 sitting and waiting with years worth of learned lessons about what a modern shooter should and shouldn't do, and literally just has to copy and paste it over. The damage values, how the game works, certain functionalities, although it isn't perfect, it's definitely a far better base for the system than 2042. It just shouldn't be the case right now that certain elements of the game are either massively nerfed or completely overpowered, and there are no in-betweens. You know, nerfing these helicopters, attack helicopters, little birds, the Bolt into complete oblivion is an option, but effectively making them useless isn't really balancing. That's not a good form of balancing, but I can see why they did it in the temporary short term. And I guess my final thing is just add more content to the game. I know Season 1 is coming, but Battlefield Portal is sitting right there, and there are just so many weapons that could be added very quickly and succinctly to Battlefield 2042 to make it more of an enjoyable experience, especially in the light machine gun category, and especially in certain other areas where the general feel and setup is a little bit weak. Just port these guns over into the main base game. So folks, that's what I want to see early on from Battlefield 2042 in 2022. It's a very long road to go, and I'm not necessarily giving up on 2042, but I have focused a little bit more elsewhere recently. But I do think this game can turn a corner. It just needs to be willing to do so. So folks, that's it for this video. Leave a like, leave a subscribe of course. The majority of people watching this video aren't subscribed. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll catch you in the next one.